Imagine, for just a second, stepping directly into a moment of, well, totally devastating, suffocating silence. It's a silence the historical text doesn't explicitly spell out for us, but honestly, it's one we are absolutely required to feel. We're talking about the exact moment immediately following the world's first murder. In this explainer, we're looking at a time when Adam and Eve are no longer simply the first man and woman. Suddenly, they are grieving parents. They're standing in a world they've lost twice now, first at the gates of Eden, and now, tragically, at the edge of a field. One son, Abel, lies in the grave. The other, Cain, lives in exile. The world must have felt infinitely darker than before. But it is right here, in this profound mystery of grace after complete devastation, that we find the quiet, unassuming life of a man who literally changed the course of human history.
So this brings us to a massive, deeply universal question, doesn't it? How does hope actually survive unimaginable grief? I want you to really think about the profound emptiness of the first family's brokenness here. Think about the crushing burden of memory they had to carry every single day. How does any family move forward when they know they can never ever return to what once was? Adam and Eve were entirely alone in the aftermath of human history's first total catastrophe. It felt like hope itself would need to die a second death just to be completely extinguished.
But here is the incredible part. Into this house, a house that must have felt completely haunted by absence, life continued. The words again, still, yet are basically the grammar of grace right in the middle of ruin. After the collapse of the first marriage in Eden and the absolute collapse of the first brotherhood out in the field, we see the birth of a third son, Seth. You know, Seth's birth feels like the very first sunrise after a long, terribly dark night. He enters the story with an entirely different emotional atmosphere than his older brothers did. He isn't born into that raw expectation of the very first beginnings, and he doesn't know the innocence of Eden. No, he is the child given after the field. He's the ultimate proof that God responds to human devastation not by putting a final period at the end of the sentence, but by offering a new beginning.
Just listen to the profound depth of Eve's response here in Genesis 4:25. It brilliantly showcases what we might call a theological double consciousness. She says, God has appointed for me another offspring instead of Abel, for Cain killed him. Notice what she's doing. She is brilliantly holding this deep, agonizing grief for Abel right alongside the incredible gratitude for Seth's arrival. She holds them simultaneously. She doesn't let one emotion erase the other. She names the loss, she names the killer, and she names the gift. You know, modern psychology often acts as if grief and gratitude just can't coexist, right? Like a new beginning has to somehow magically erase an old wound. But Eve absolutely insists on holding both at the exact same time. And Seth is born right into this profound awareness.
Now, the secret to this amazing continuation actually lies right in his name. Sheth, in Hebrew, comes from a root word meaning to set, to place, appointed, or given by God. So Seth wasn't merely a replacement designed to magically make Adam and Eve forget all about Abel. Actually, scratch that. No human being can ever truly replace another, right? Instead, Seth was a divine provision placed directly into the massive, painful vacancy torn open by loss. The Hebrew word tahat, which means instead of or in place of, shows us that Seth's very existence was a daily, living acknowledgement of the empty space Abel left behind. Seth proves that God's purposes absolutely had not died out there in the field. He is a divine appointment positioned exactly where human hope had seemingly run dry.
And this gives us the absolute, undeniable anchor of this whole narrative. Grace is stronger than the field. The tragedy between the brothers, the blood spilled in the dirt, the total failure of human goodness, none of that, absolutely none of it, had the final word on the future of humanity. Grace, in this context, isn't about erasing the catastrophe. It's about the miraculous continuation of the future despite it. Death took one son. It drove another away. But death quickly discovered that it had not exhausted the possibilities for this family.
From this exact moment, human history basically fractures into two totally diverging paths. On one side, we've got Cain's line. These are the builders, right? They're building the first cities, inventing technology, creating music, and forging metal. It's civilization growing at breakneck speed, but it's growing over a really shaky foundation of unresolved resentment and violence. Now, on the other side, we have Seth's line. This path is entirely different. It's marked by quiet restoration, faithful remembrance, and deep covenantal stability. And this teaches us something so fascinating. Some lives become famous because they dramatically bust history wide open with monumental achievements. But others become great because they simply preserve what must not disappear. Seth belongs squarely 100% in that second category.
And that beautiful preservation is perfectly captured in early Genesis with this line: "Then men began to call upon the name of the Lord." This incredible shift happens during the days of Seth and his son Enoch. I really want you to feel the monumental weight of this. It is truly one of the most important moments in the ancient text. This right here, this is the survival of prayer. Worship, which had been so corrupted by Cain's jealousy and seemingly buried right alongside Abel, actually survives the trauma of the first family's collapse. The violence did not erase the reverence. The crushing grief of those parents did not silence humanity's heavenward calling.
So, what is Seth's ultimate legacy? What's the big takeaway? It's the preservation of worship. Seth didn't go out and build a grand, famous city. He didn't forge weapons out of bronze or iron. His greatness wasn't found in dramatic, flashy individuality. His greatness was in keeping humanity's relationship with God alive. He is the very first restorer of lineage. Think about it. To rebuild prayer after that kind of tragedy, to preserve truth after such dark corruption, to continue goodness after brutal violence. That is the true spirit of Seth. He represents a soul that simply refuses to be defined by trauma, even though his whole life started right in the middle of it.
When we look at Genesis 5, we see a genealogy, but right beneath those names lies an incredibly profound reality. The text tells us that Adam fathered Seth in his own likeness, after his image. Seth is quite literally an image of an image. The divine likeness was passed forward, sure, but it was carried right through Adam's fallen humanity. Seth inherited both the incredible, breathtaking glory of the divine image and the deep, painful wound of the fall. He's the carrier of sacred continuity despite the sheer brokenness of the world around him. He becomes the absolute archetype of what we call the remnant principle, meaning when corruption spreads like wildfire, God always preserves a line.
And this actually establishes a wild biblical pattern that we see repeat over and over again, the pattern of the third child. It's the third option, the child given in the gap after human failure and tragedy have completely exhausted the first two options. We see this rhythm constantly, right? Think of Isaac, given after Ishmael and years of painful barrenness. Think of Jacob, the second of the twins, chosen over Esau. Think of Joseph, the 11th son, whose path literally went through betrayal in a pit. Seth is the original prototype of this divine grace stepping right into the gap. God's grace clearly doesn't wait around for human perfection. It provides the way forward when things seem entirely lost.
Which naturally leads us to ask, who exactly were these quiet preservers of sacred memory that followed him? I want you to envision Seth's descendants not as mighty conquerors or kings, but as a sacred chain of people. Picture them passing a single fragile torch forward through increasingly dark and difficult times. The whole world was sliding heavily toward corruption, but this one unremarkable line of humans just kept showing up. They kept living, and they kept faithfully passing the image of God down to the very next generation.
Just look at this sacred chain stretching through history. From Seth comes Enoch, who sparked communal prayer. Down the line through Kenan, Mahalalel, and Jared. Then in the 7th generation, we find Enoch, a man who famously walked with God. Then the 8th generation gives us Methuselah, the longest-lived human, representing just incredible endurance. And finally, Noah. Let this sink in. Without Seth, there is no Noah. There is no ark. There is no preservation of humanity through the Great Flood. This quiet, totally unassuming line became the absolute crucial bridge to humanity's very survival.
Let's just pause on this number for a second. 1. It perfectly emphasizes the profound dignity of one single, quiet life. Seth never had a burning bush moment. He never parted a giant sea. He honestly never even knew the epic future he was carrying in his DNA. He was simply faithful in the unglamorous everyday work of being the next generation. And yet the immense power of that one unremarkable life is just staggering to think about. It proves, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that you don't have to be spectacular to be indispensable to a much grander plan.
So we return, finally, to the existential anchor of this entire explainer. It really all could have ended right there with Cain and Abel. Think about it. The first family produced the world's first murder in its very first generation. The ground itself was cursed. The marriage was bruised. By all human logic, the story absolutely should have terminated right there in the dirt. But it did not. God continued writing history. He responds to human devastation, not with an ending, but with continuity. Right into that exact, crushing devastation, God simply placed a child.
And because of that one life, a massive, cinematic family tree begins to grow, its branches reaching relentlessly forward through history. From Seth's line, generations later, comes Abraham and the Great Covenant. Centuries after that, the nation of Israel, King David, and the establishment of the kingdom. And millennia later, from that exact same genealogical spine, comes Jesus, the Messiah. Seth is the structural hope. He is the quiet, hidden root of a great tree that perfectly connects the ruin of the first Adam to the ultimate redemption brought by the second Adam.
Cain built the first city. Abel became the first martyr, but Seth carried the future. When grief threatened to end the story, God appointed another beginning. And through one quiet life, the line continued.